So, I'm glad I could get y'all on here so we can talk about
Yeah.
our book swap.
Yeah.
Do you
A
want to
conjoined book haul video.
conjoin book haul? Yeah, that sounds distressing. So, to introduce y'all, I have Storytoob, Carlos and Yolanda. Would you like to tell everyone what your book channel is about?
Oh no, I was going to tell you to do it. Hi. Yes, we are StoryTube, and it's our joint
I'm
book
sorry, did I
channel.
say booktube or
Did you say
Storytube?
book?
StoryTube. I think you
I
said
don't know.
StoryTube.
Our
Because
booktube channel? I don't know.
there
You
you
can
go.
see our name on the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We
Um,
all know what's going on here.
anyway, we read a bit of everything, and we started our channel when we were reading predominantly fantasy, because that's kind of how we discovered BookTube. But we also read a lot of crime fiction, and we are trying to get people to try crime fiction.
We also read a lot of like kind of everything.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think we're trying to get people to read other genre fiction because we think genre fiction readers just they like a good story in a certain genre, and if whatever, I don't know. But yeah, we kind of put a lot of focus on crime fiction.
yeah.
Well,
We're
it's
also
working because I've read a
Yeah,
lot of stuff because of y'all.
yeah, yeah. And some of the crime videos are starting to get some traction, like by our relatively tiny standards. But for sure, we do get comments from people saying, "Hey, I tried that. That was good. Great, keep doing it."
it's all you can
But
aspire to.
yeah, it's also good for getting recommendations from people, like what
What
we'll
we're
show
about
Like
to
you
this,
do.
this,
later.
like this
Yeah,
whole video.
like this whole video, 100%. So yeah, that's us. That's us. We talk about books and shit.
Yes, and we're in Ireland. That's another defining characteristic.
Yeah.
Well, so do you want to give the origin of our book swap, or do you want me to do it?
The origin of our book swap is you talking about John D. MacDonald, the Travis McGee series, because I believe we read Dashiell Hammett together this year,
Yep.
and you started reading Travis McGee novels on Bridger's recommendation.
Yep.
Am I correct?
Oh yeah.
And I said, probably Googled it in the moment and was like, I can't find these books. And then you took it upon yourself to find those books over there and send them to me. And I was like, well, Joseph, I must therefore send you books from here that you can't find there. So I went and I bought you a couple of things that we'll talk about in a minute. I think that's the origin. Is that the? Did I get it right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And so to let the viewers know, basically what we're going to be doing is I'm going to sell you on the John D. MacDonald books I sent,
Amazing.
and then you can tell me about each of these because I tried to include them in a book haul and realized I had no idea what I was talking about and thought I should go to the source.
Fantastic. We generally don't do book haul videos. Have we? We did one book haul.
I did one book haul video when I was buying Irish books, and I haven't read a single one of them, I think. So,
Uh,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, we also did a Christmas one because
Yeah.
we do a game. We do something similar. So we do a Christmas game, and we do it usually on Christmas Eve. Well, we don't buy the books on Christmas Eve usually, but we buy them the day before Christmas Eve. I know we're getting off track here, but bear with me. We buy them, but just before Christmas Eve, and we call it the game. And I'll buy a certain number of books for you, and she'll buy a certain number of books for me, and then we swap one by one, and we say why we bought it, and yada yada yada. That's it. So we've been doing that every Christmas for the last few years.
It's a great game.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's an awesome game.
yeah. Sometimes we go way overboard, where we're like, we'll do three, and then we get into the bookshop, and we're like, I'll text her and I'm like, I have 5 in my hand. And she's like, I have 9. So then we're just like, do we drop 4 or do we just add 1 and make it 10 and a nice round number? And we're like, let's do 10. And that's how it usually goes.
That's a smart way to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry. John D. MacDonald. Is that where
Yeah.
we were going?
Yes. I want to make sure I get I'm going to pull up the list just so I can remember which ones I sent you.
I
think I
can
remember.
show you right now.
Display.
That's true.
You sent. Oh, is that backwards?
No, they're good. It's correct on my end. But
Oh, no.
yeah, the first 5 in the series. So yeah, so I guess I will run through them real quick. That's the first one. Yeah, the Deep Blue Goodbye. So the cool thing about the Deep Blue Goodbye, now that I've read 10 of the books in the series, is that the cool thing about the Deep Blue Goodbye is it literally gives you pretty much everything you're gonna need to know about Travis McGee. It sets up your expectations for the series. Like,
Yeah.
he does a good job of kind of changing the pace as a good crime writer does, and changing kind of the setting or what he's looking for. But that is like the quintessential Travis McGee novel, and
Cool.
of course it's a perfect first book in the series. And you don't have to read them in order, but I am neurotic and I have to read them in order. And so they do work well in order. And like with that one, it blew me away. I knew it was going to be good, but I didn't know that it was just going to be like damn near perfect.
It blew you away, as in
It blew me away, yes.
BLUE. Yes.
And I love that all of those have the scantily clad lady on them and a nice little artistic rendition of Travis McGee.
As
The-
all books should.
The covers and the design, I just love it. I love how pulpy they are. It's
Oh yeah.
great.
Yeah. Look
That
at
one
this.
right there is the second one, Nightmare in Pink. That has one of the most like terrifying moments I've ever read in a book, like like psychological thriller.
Cool.
I had to keep reminding myself that there were more in the series because I was freaking out. It's so wonderfully written. And that is the third one. That one, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Right.
they're so short as well.
Put them
Yes.
in order. Deep Blue Goodbye. Nightmare
Purple
in
Place
Pink.
or Nightmare in Pink, and then the problem is yeah,
Red Box.
no, I think Purple Place for Dying is the third one. My mistake, because
Cool.
he published the first 4 in 1964, and so they get kind of rearranged like that. I got
Right.
an amazing hardcover that's the first 3, and they're not in order, and it drives me insane.
Oh no.
But yeah, Purple Place for Dying is the third one. Now that one, I gotta tell you, the easiest way to sell you on that one is the thing that it reminds me of most is No Country for Old Men, in the tone, like the movie No Country for Old Men, like the book too, but it feels, he doesn't say exactly where he's at, but it's in like Southwest Texas. It has to be.
Yeah.
And it's very, very cool. That one has like a better vibe than it does like a mystery, but the mystery is still good.
Mm-hmm.
And the Quick Red Fox, that one is probably the weakest of the 5, but it's still very good. I think that each one kind of hits a little differently, and I've noticed like my wife and I don't share the same favorites, which I got her into these right after I read the Deep Blue Goodbye, and she's obsessed with them. They've been like her favorite thing she's read all year.
How many are there in total?
21.
Fuck.
Yeah.
All right.
They're all
That's like
short.
2 Ted Williams books.
That is like 2 Todd Williams books.
That it's true. Yeah. A Deadly Shade of Gold is it's not my favorite out of the first 5 because Nightmare in Pink exists, but A Deadly Shade of Gold, you see it's bigger, and I don't know if it says it on that cover, but it was advertised as like a double McGee novel because it's almost twice as
Yes.
long.
Yeah. Double length adventure.
And it feels like it. It does feel like two adventures put together, but it's very fun. Most of it takes place in Mexico on like it's funny because it actually takes place near where some of the Power of the Dog takes place.
Ooh.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's
Sold.
yeah, sold. Yeah.
End of video. We'll read them now. Yeah.
Yeah. But
It's
yeah,
still under 300 pages,
yeah.
which is great.
Maybe they just made the font smaller or something. You'll go blind reading it.
That's actually, it's very reasonable.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So, I think I know the answer to this question, but of the old masters of pulp, who do you really sort of think is the best writer?
The best writer? Man. I mean,
Handler, Hammett, McDonald.
it's I think it's McDonald for me. I mean, I read 10 of them in the last 3.5 months or 3 months. So, but yeah, he has an unfair advantage of writing 30 years later compared to those guys. But he did cut his teeth around the same time that like Hammett and why am I forgetting his name?
Chandler?
Yeah, Chandler were like at their peak because he'd been writing since the late 40s. So John D. MacDonald had a master's in business from Harvard. He's like an Ivy League education, and he was supposed to go into like business or something. That's what his parents wanted, and he's like, I think I'm going to live in Florida and write books instead.
Nice.
If
Yeah.
only that were financially feasible.
Yeah,
It is.
he his story's so interesting, and he does use that business degree in these books. Some of the books, one of them later on in the series is literally like white collar real estate crime. It's awesome.
Oh,
I haven't told you what Travis McGee does. Like we've got this far into it. He is not a detective. He is a salvage consultant. And so the way that works is he lives on his houseboat and he is retired. He said he's taking his retirement a little at a time in his 30s instead of waiting until he's old and can't enjoy it. And so he only works when he has to. And as a salvage consultant, the way it works is you come to him with a problem. He will find what you're looking for, but he gets 50% of the value plus expenses. That way,
Okay.
only people who are desperate come to him, and the work is interesting. And it's usually, of course, below board because anyone
Yep.
that needs a stolen thing back usually goes to the police. And so most people are like, well, I guess half's better than nothing, and they know he can find it. And that's his whole premise. And throughout the series, of course, I mean, literally the first one, it's like the second page or something. His girlfriend's like, I have a friend that really needs help. You should listen to it. And he's like, nah, I don't feel like working right now. And she's like, just talk to her, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course he gets it. You will see Reacher in some of Travis McGee.
Cool.
Like there is he has to have been a heavy influence on Reacher, because it's now I'm just mad and I'm going to be doing this because you told me no, or
Yeah.
it's interesting instead of I'm doing it for money. And, I
Definitely.
mean, he lives on a boat. He's borderline homeless.
So Travis McGee has never worked in law enforcement?
No.
All right.
It's funny when he interacts with cops throughout the series because they're like, why do you sound like you know what you're talking about? And they're like, what are you, some kind of criminal? Or he's like, no. And they're like, well, where were you a cop? And he's like, I've never been a cop.
Cool.
He is a Korean War vet, which comes up occasionally. It's not like a heavy thing, but it's just like Reacher,
Yeah.
a war veteran who happens to find things or find people or solve mysteries.
Get himself into trouble because he can't resist.
Lots of trouble. I haven't read it yet, but I'm really looking forward to The Green Ripper, which is book 18. It came out in 79, so 15 years after the first one. I have heard that it is either loved or hated by McGee enjoyers because he isn't solving a mystery. It's more of a like action thriller type thing.
Right.
So it's cool that John D. McDonald can just like change gears. And I've also heard one of the other ones later in the series is literally him finding a stamp collection, but somehow it's one of the best books in the entire series.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So it's not always a murder. The mystery can be
The mystery is usually him finding something.
okay. That's actually a lot more interesting than just here's a PI solving murders for 21 books.
Yeah.
I also absolutely believe that somebody with a stamp collection would like go out of their way desperate to get somebody to find it if they
Yeah.
lost it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That makes sense.
So he's like a modern day. Well, that is modern day, but like a non-historical artifact Indiana Jones. He's an Indiana
Sometimes.
Jones.
So actually, I won't tell you which one, but one of the books that I sent you in that series does involve him dealing with ancient artifacts.
Cool.
Cool.
All right. Now I have a totally different perception of the series. I
Yeah.
thought this was rugged, kind of snarky PI who was just a really fun character to read. That's what I thought this was.
No, he's more borderline homeless, good at finding things, and doesn't like working. But he is rugged.
That
That's great.
sounds great, actually.
That's
I can,
Reacher.
I can relate to 2 out of those 3 things.
Yeah.
The
That's
great
definitely
thing,
Reacher.
another great selling point is how good McDonald is at making you feel like you're in Florida or wherever you're at in the books in the 1960s. It just is so cool. He does such a great job of just immersing you in like the world of Travis McGee.
Which is your favorite of the books so far?
So of the 10 I've read, it would be, I think it's Darker Than Amber, and I have a funny story about that one. Or is it Bright Orange for the Shroud? I got to look at the synopsis real quick so I can make sure it's the right one.
Are they blending together for you in terms of titles?
Titles, yeah, but mostly because the naming convention, like, it's cool because each one is a color, and then he actually uses that phrase in the book in like a very appropriate and eloquent way. But the only reason these couple are bleeding together is because one of them I read them like back to back. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it is Bright Orange for the Shroud is probably my favorite, and Nightmare in Pink was my favorite until I read that one. And the funny thing about Bright Orange for the Shroud is I was on a podcast recently as like a book club thing, and I suggested Bright Orange for the Shroud, but they have like a kind of lighthearted, they have fun with what they're reading. And then I read it, and it was like as messed up as True Detective Season 1. I don't know if y'all watched it.
Yep.
And I was like, I messaged Jake from Pulp Mortem, and I'm like, hey, I read the book ahead of time. We don't need to do this. And I told him, I was like, it is messed up. It is by far like the most like brutal in the series, and my wife said the same thing, but there's a couple scenes in there that are like almost panic attack inducing because he does such a great job of writing like the intensity of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, honestly, it'd be just as easy for me to say that One Fearful Yellow Eye is amazing because it's so different. It takes place instead of sunny Florida or sunny like Southwest Texas, it takes place during like a snowstorm in Chicago, and then ends in like just a completely different way than the rest of the books. You get basically a glimpse at like the outside world instead of it being just hyper focused on McGee, and it's really, really good. They're all like that. I think the weakest is probably, I don't even know. No, they're not weak. So that's the problem. I'm looking at the list and I'm like, well, maybe The Girl in the Plain Brown Wrapper, and I'm like, no, I just finished that one. It was actually really good. Felt like classic McGee. And then I'm like, well, Pale Gray for Guilt, and I'm like, no, that's The White Collar Crime, and it's such a good change of pace compared to the other ones that it kind of stands on its own. So yeah, they're just, as you can tell, I might be a very big fan of Travis McGee.
Maybe never have guessed. Are you gonna finish the series in the new year?
Yes, I was doing one a week, and then I interrupted that to read his great American novel, which we can talk about if you want to,
Oh yes.
and then what came up? Oh, my wife was lagging behind, so I told her, I was like, "You gotta hurry up." So catch up to me so we can go on to the next book. I didn't want to just blow past her, and so
Has she read 10 now?
yes, she finished
Cool.
it. So now we can do the next one. But right now I'm stuck in the Cosmere. So when I'm done with that, I'll get back to.
Ah, you have joined the mass hysteria of wind bringing truth
Yep, I'm
again.
almost done too. So
Is it good?
yeah, it's outstanding. Like I had such a
Cool.
bad taste in my mouth after Rhythm of War being like the most mid thing ever, and then this one's just yeah, it's amazing.
Does it
Even
retroactively make Rhythm of War better?
yet no, no. Because I was about to say yes because, but then I was just gonna say yes because my favorite character has more screen time in this book, and he had good screen time in the last one. But I'm like, it doesn't matter what book he's in, he's always the best. So
Cool. Well, the other thing that you sent,
yeah,
which was a great gift, is probably one of my favorite books. Certainly one of the crime books that I think of in my early reading phase, that I can remember to fucking name, because I used to read on digital, like an e-reader, and I struggle to remember titles. Like the Reacher books, I don't know what the titles are. They're all the same.
yeah.
It's Reacher goes to a small town, beats up a lot of bad guys. That one. This one, however, Mystic River, I never owned physically, and sir, this is a hardcover, but it is not just a hardcover, people. It is a signed hardcover, and it is not just a signed hardcover, people. It is, where does it say it? It is a signed first edition hardcover. Look at that. Can you see that? Can you see
I
that?
don't
A
think you can.
little. It's a first. It's a first printing too, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah, I'm good at finding those.
it's extremely cool.
I think if I were to go on eBay on this side of the Atlantic and look for this, I don't know how much it would cost, but shipping would probably be like 60 quid.
It's also just in insanely good condition.
That's in really good
Like
condition.
it's
Yeah,
the pages are not yellowed at all. There's no bumps in it. Like it looks great.
But I also feel bad for you sending it to me because I recommended this book to you, I think. Um, or, well, I'm sure you had heard of this book before.
I
But,
hadn't until you recommended it.
oh shit. Um, but I kind of feel bad that you didn't just keep it for yourself, but I
Well,
assume you were able to find another.
yeah, I made sure that it was easy for me to get another one before I gifted it to you.
Cool.
Good.
That's
Good.
good. That's good. So you're not totally generous. You're a little
No,
generous.
just
Yeah.
a little. You can knock about 10% off the generosity. It's fine.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. We like 90% generosity.
Yeah, it's reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do I sell you on this book now?
I
Would you
you
like me to
can.
sell you on this book?
I think
Um, because you also read it, so you can also sell them on this book.
Yeah, well, I have a whole video. It's
I was
actually
gonna say
happening.
I've watched that video.
Oh yeah, I
She
forgot you
already
made
did
that
sell me
video.
on that book.
Why didn't I do that video with you? Oh, you were also talking about Ohio, which
Yeah.
I haven't read. Anyway, this book is traumatic. It is, yes, it's crime fiction, but it is a little bit like, if you've ever seen the TV show The Killing, it focuses a lot on the surrounding family and friends and people surrounding the crime, rather than any kind of investigation that's going on into a murder or a disappearance. And it focuses on the emotional toll that a situation like this creates on family, friends, people at odds in a situation like this. And it's also set in Boston, which is great because I
Yeah.
really like stuff that's set in Boston, mainly because of how Boston people talk to each other, which is very like Dublin, which makes sense given the history of the two cities. That's Mystic River. Also, the ending is very, very sad.
Not just the ending, the whole book is sad.
This is true.
It's a sad book.
Yeah. But yeah, if you like sad endings, if you like having your heart ripped to shreds by characters that you sort of learn to love, and then you have characters that you kind of love that are at odds with each other, and you know something bad is going to happen to one of them, but you don't know which one.
Okay, then. I am definitely going to read it in 2025. It is on my like must read list for next year.
Nice.
I would say for people who like labels, it is a little more on the sort of literary, sort of contemporary fiction side of crime fiction, I would say.
Yeah.
Sounds good and sad. I'm down.
It is good and sad.
So when you mentioned something you mentioned and there just triggered something I meant to tell you about the McGee series. Every
Ooh.
single one of the books has like this one. Travis McGee is incredibly jaded and his social commentary is just wonderful. But also every single one of these books has like an emotional like catharsis or like a every they all have someone healing from a traumatic event in them. Like that's one of the things that Travis McGee is like the ultimate white knight, but not in like some creepy internet way. He
Yeah,
genuinely cares about the people that he's helping, and more often than not, it ends with like him helping someone just kind of get over what's gone on. It always feels so good, even if like the ending isn't as satisfying as you would have wanted it to be. He might not even solve the mystery, but you just feel better at the end just watching
yeah,
these people just do what people do. And that's the other thing is the way McGee talks about love or interpersonal relationships, because you know it's first person, so he has a lot of his internal monologues, and it's just wonderful. I vibe with him so much. He's just so jaded. I love it.
and
That sounds great.
in terms of like the noir pulpy stuff, um, Dashiell Hammett for me is a little better at writing women than Raymond Chandler would
Yeah.
be. And how is John Dee?
So he has a lot of, I guess, damsels in distress, but none of the women are just that. They're not just there to kind of move the plot along or something. I mean, a good example is the Quick Red Fox. The whole thing is the premise is this very hot, very popular actress. She has some she did some bad things and someone took some photos of it and she wants the photos back, and that's the whole setup for it.
Right.
And she comes across as like the stereotypical, oh help me, I'm just a woman, I don't know anything, blah blah blah. And then but there's this like subtext, and throughout the book you see more and more, and like McGee's like, I'm not an idiot, I'm not gonna fall for this. And the same goes for her assistant who is helping him. Like her whole story, none of the women are one-sided, and but it is very mid 1960s. I'll give you that, but it's not a I don't think it's a bad thing. I specifically asked my wife
Yeah.
about that too, and she was like, no, because I don't know if you've watched it, but Brian Lee Durfee did a review of the first two books, and in one of them he's like, yeah, there's this domestic violence, and I just, he hits her and blah blah blah, and I was like, yeah, but she literally hit him first, and it's not doesn't make it better, but it's not like he just like beat some woman or something like. And the other way it's like very 1960s is Travis McGee does like he'll snap someone out of like panicking by like either saying something like super like mean or derogatory or something, but it's literally just to like break them from panicking or doing whatever they're doing. Like, I don't think it comes across as like sexist, and I don't think he fridges any women or anything. There's none of those like super generic tropes.
Say the outrageous thing to shock someone. Yeah.
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 There's a fine line sometimes between like a product of its time, which at the end of the day it has to be in some capacity,
Yeah.
and being like horrible. Because I don't buy into this idea of like when you read something that happens to be 50, 60, 70 years old and it's sexist to just be like, oh, what product of its time? Like, no, there were nice people around back then,
Well, like,
that weren't horrible. So like, but
yeah.
they can have like just a different perception of like
Yeah.
what you should or should not say and things like that. That's like fine, because it's
Yeah.
just how things were.
We read The Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett, which is almost 100 years old. And I thought that was quite progressive for
He
that
is
genre
he is
of book.
definitely more Dashiell Hammett than Raymond Chandler when it comes to his handling of women. The coolest thing is like most of these women are, well, all of them really are very self-aware of it being 1964
Yeah.
and succeeding in a very sexist society. So it's very
Yeah.
cool that he writes the characters in that way.
See, there's just like, for me, as long as I guess there's not that kind of approach where they're just a blank canvas.
Yeah.
And, oh, I am a piece of cardboard.
Yeah.
Help me, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Where you're like, did this author ever interact with a woman? Actually,
Yeah.
yeah.
From what I remember, I haven't read Chandler in a really, really long time, but from what I remember, thinking back, it's just save the poor woman.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't know any better. Pretty much.
Yeah.
But cool. So
Well, I'm successfully sold.
yeah, so I was just
Good.
gonna say, we have been discussing a lot recently about the way we're reading and the fact that we both have booktube channels and blah 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 and like Goodreads and all this kind of stuff. I don't know if you do Goodreads or anything like that,
Yeah.
but it like affects sometimes what you pick or what you choose to read. And that's annoying, and it's been really annoying you lately,
Yeah, I've been struggling.
to the point where she read 2 Dennis Lehane books this year, and the way you would usually read is like, oh my god, I really love the way this guy writes, I'm going to read everything that he's written. But prior commitments and like getting to different things and blah 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 and sort of a weird pressure you put on yourself, you didn't, and you're kind of frustrated, and it makes all of the other stuff you're reading a little less good or less enjoyable. So throwing shit out the window and just saying, hey, I'm going to read 5 John D. MacDonald books is a nice idea, perhaps.
Especially because they're as long as one fantasy book. Quite literally.
Quite literally, yeah. This is probably still shorter than Wind and Truth.
Absolutely.
The first 10 are probably shorter than Wind and Truth. Like, if we're going by word count, I'm almost positive that's the case.
First one's 130 pages.
Oh
I'd
my
say
God.
that's barely one chapter of Wind and Truth.
Yeah.
Second one's 140.
I don't
Third
know
one's
how
100.
Nightmare in Pink is 140 because it's shorter than the first book.
That's funny. Font.
Yeah.
The font is slightly bigger.
Yeah. I
Ever so slightly.
I love that he has these incredibly short books and they just work perfectly. Just the pacing, and then even with A Deadly Shade of Gold that's twice as long, still perfect. The pacing, like it feels It feels like he was just like, hey, I'm going to take this exact same pacing and I'm just going to eke like 10% out of each little step and just expand it a little. And it's just so good.
Accidentally unplugged the mic there. Sorry.
Oh,
Are we good?
Are we good?
Yeah.
I think you're picking up on a different mic now.
That's the camera.
I have a stupid thing where every time I turn this
There we go.
on, it tries to do like a virtual connection to the camera on my phone. And I'm like, I never set this up. What is this doing?
I hate automatic stuff with like new smart devices. Like, just stop. I will do it. I will connect.
Yes.
Yeah. Just give me a cable.
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How's that? Are we back? Is it back?
Yep, y'all are good. Perfect.
Cool. We can cut that out.
Yeah.
I know, Yolanda, I know exactly what you're talking about when it comes to like Goodreads and everything else people are like suggesting, and it's like getting overwhelmed and just being, because I am normally a binger. Like if I start a series or something, I just binge the whole thing, which is why like earlier in the month I read the first 5 Chronicles of Amber books by Roger Zelazny. Jimmy brought them up and was like, have you read them yet? And I'm like, no. And then I read 3 of them that weekend. I was like, I'm binging this crap. I'm not waiting. I'm not gonna space it out. I just want to enjoy these books to enjoy them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of how my brain works. Like, on the one hand, I need the space to like not pressure myself to binge it. So if people are like, let's read the first 3, I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to read 3. Maybe I just
Yeah.
want to read 1. But then if I start it and I'm really, really into it, I want to just keep going. But
Yep.
then this like forcing yourself to wait for someone, or to like, oh no, I have to now go to these other things that are like a buddy read or a scheduled thing or something I said I would do. And then the mood maybe passes and then it's too late and then you don't go back to it. And then you're like, why did I not go back to it? I wanted to binge this thing. And yeah, it's annoying. And like, it's all just mental blockers, because it's not like somebody's pointing a gun to your head and saying, you can't keep going.
Yeah.
You have to do this other thing. I think it's just like learning to do those things that you would have done naturally by yourself. To do those things consciously, right? Like while being
Consciously, yeah. I think making the sort of conscious, decisive thing of like, no, I am not going to do that thing that I feel slightly anxious or pressured to do. It's okay to say no. Or it's okay to like, if you're filming a wrap up or whatever, or like tracking things, it's okay if I just have 5 of one thing in one video, and that's okay. I have always kind of read sort of scattered because my brain is scattered. So like I will read one thing and then be in the mood for an entirely different thing after that thing, which is kind of just how I've always worked. But there was a time where I did binge certain series and read a certain number of books, a certain whatever, at one time. But I was never one to read like, you know, if I discovered the John D. MacDonald books when I was 16, I probably would have read like 4 and then moved on to something else,
Yeah.
and then probably come back to them like 5 years later, you know?
Yep.
Like with Reacher. Reacher's one of my favorite characters of all time. I think I've read like 8 of them. And I have known these books since I was like 14 or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know.
The way I'd been using the McGee books was like they were my palate cleanser between other stuff. Like if I really wanted to take a break, it used to be I'd be like, I'm going to listen to podcasts all day today. But now I'll just throw on a Travis McGee book when I'm at work or something.
Yeah.
nice.
Can you get them easily on audio?
Yeah, the narrator is amazing. His name is Robert Petkoff. I don't know if he's available over there, but he's one of my favorite narrators now. Same goes for my wife. She listens to him as well, and I have made sure that it wasn't the narrator giving me like a bias toward the books. I've cracked them open and read, and they read so well. I mean, he was a huge influence on Stephen King. Like Stephen King used to use John D. MacDonald books in his literature classes.
Oh,
So,
cool.
and I found all this out recently. I wish some other Stephen King enjoyers would have told me, but I said that in the group too. But he wrote John D. MacDonald wrote the introduction to Night Shift, Stephen King's short story collection.
Shit.
Yeah, and I was like, wait, that happened? And then I was looking it up, and Stephen King wrote an obituary for John D. MacDonald, and then wrote a article for the local Sarasota newspaper where John D. MacDonald lived most of his life in Florida. And I can't find that, and I think I have to pay to get access to it, but I really want to read it.
You are definitely going to pay to get access to that.
I will. It'll probably only cost me $1. It'd be worth it.
Yeah. Cool. I think I might read one before the end of the year because it's 130 pages.
Yeah.
I think you should do it too.
I might. Yeah.
I hope y'all like it because I mean I've fallen in love with the books. They're so fun. They're such a great escape. That's what I've liked about them most.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think it's also just the fact that they are so short.
Yes.
And you can get a satisfying story in such a contained little package.
Which is such a skill as well, to be
Yes.
able to tell something that's satisfying and interesting and compelling in like a really short. Yeah.
Because we've also been reading a lot of literary fiction as well this year, which can be short, but I find quite often with literary fiction, a good story takes a back seat. Most of the time.
It depends on the...
Depends.
Yeah.
And it is more about absorbing the writing. So even if something is 150 pages, you really do just need to take it slow and appreciate the writing because that's the purpose of that book. In general, I'm speaking in generalizations. So like even with short literary fiction, it's not going to be a quick, fun story most of the time. But with these little pulpy crime books, if they're well written, yeah, I'm totally down.
They are. I love the way they're written. Like it sounds so pretentious to say, but they transcend the genre. Like the way they are written, it's just such tight, like beautiful writing. I love it. Like you said, it's definitely a skill to be able to write like that. I think that is the thing I like most. So like the Deep Blue Goodbye, it's just like the perfect kind of basic McGee story. Nightmare in Pink is like a psychological thriller. A Purple Place for Dying is about the setting as much as it is the mystery. And then the Quick Red Fox is, a lot of it is kind of his commentary on like Hollywood and like the industry and that kind of thing. There's some of that in there too. And then A Deadly Shade of Gold is just all of those things mashed into like one. There's just so much going because it's a double McGee book. But yeah, that's the thing I've loved so far is they each feel very distinct, even though it's just a dude finding something.
I think the series should just have that as like the log line.
Dude finding something.
Yeah.
Dude keeps finding shit
Yeah.
in every book. Cool. Will we sell you on what we sent you?
I don't remember what it is, so I'm very intrigued.
I
I
guess
think
we'll
I
go one
remember.
book at a time. So the first one, In a Lonely Place by Dorothy B. Hughes.
Very
Which
apt.
we
That's
do
a
have
good
a video about.
We do. Yeah. Did you watch that video, Joseph?
Yes, I did.
Nice. Okay. Job done. Are you sold?
I am sold. I'm sold for a few reasons, not only because of you, but also Carl Edward Wagner, one of my favorite dark fantasy writers, and horror fiction. He named his horror collection In a Lonely Place because of this book.
Oh, cool.
You did tell me that. I forgot about that. That's really fucking cool.
Do you want to give the premise for this, or just
Yes.
a little brief selling on it?
So for the viewers, Dorothy B. Hughes wrote In a Lonely Place, which is a crime noir, pulpy noir in 1947, I want to
I
say.
think it was 47. Yeah.
Nice.
So post World War II, which is pretty cool. Um, and the basic premise is that a man is essentially not struggling novelist, but he's kind of a writer, a wannabe writer of mysteries, right?
Yeah, he's like, I think he's coming to LA from New York to take a year off to write his novel or something like that. And he
Yeah,
reconnects with his old friend from the military.
yeah.
Um,
And there is a serial killer about town, a
Ooh,
strangler,
very nice.
and there may be a woman that our main character knows who was a victim, or he may not know her, but he did know, or he may have met her. We're not exactly sure. And mystery ensues. I don't want to say, like, there's
Yeah.
actually a
that's
huge
kind of
element
it.
of the plot that I can't say because it will spoil it.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah,
It's
he
very,
gets involved in the mystery.
yeah. It's very, very pulpy in the way it's written. It's so deliciously noir. Like everything is foggy and
Yeah.
they're smoking cigars and having a drink. And like, it's like very, very like cliche aesthetically.
There's a lot of whiskey drinking and smoky rooms.
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And something that's really interesting that, again, can't really go into detail, but there's a movie adaptation with Humphrey Bogart, right?
Yep.
And the movie adaptation, because you read the book and there's elements of it where you're like, oh wow, this was written in the 40s. That's kind of ahead of its time in some ways. And then the movie adaptation, which is from like a year later, changed the ending. And we
To the
can't,
more conventional ending.
yes, so
Oh,
we can't tell you what the ending is because that would spoil it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it changes the ending, and essentially by doing that, makes it into a completely different story. Like to me, that like entirely changes the whole point of the story and the book.
Yeah.
And it's just a different story.
I think a
Um,
huge element of the book is Dorothy B. Hughes commenting on damsels in distress,
yeah,
but very directly, and how detectives in this kind of fiction present themselves as the smartest guy in the room. And I think
Yeah.
she very intentionally made this character a detective fiction writer
yeah,
rather than an actual detective. So he's got this like cocky bravado when he walks into a room where he's like, everybody loves me. Like this woman is gonna fall for me, and and she's gonna fall for my intellect.
Yeah.
And there are women in the book, specifically two women in the book, who are so much smarter than him, and it's very fun to read those interactions because it's in first person
from his
from
perspective,
his
yeah,
perspective, where he's like totally owned them, you know.
Yeah. That's
And
awesome.
the dialogue, the conversation. You're like, no, you didn't. It's very
it's
good.
but it yeah, and I don't think Hollywood at the time was ready for that.
Yeah.
But also I've actually heard people say, like contemporary modern readers, that they were disappointed by it or bored because the mystery wasn't that great. um and I just think it's the most interesting thing about this book is when it was written and putting all
Yeah.
of that into context,
Yeah.
um as like a cultural historical piece of like, yeah, of culture. um the mystery is not the most interesting part of like, oh, who did it, like that's not what the focus is on. I would assume a lot of people at the time missed that, but I think people still miss it if they're reading it for the wrong reason, or if you're reading it with too contemporary of an outlook without thinking of like, this is a woman writing in 1947 in
Yeah.
a genre that like only really started with Raymond Chandler like 20 years before, if even. So
Yeah.
yeah, I found it fascinating for that reason.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
also short.
Yes,
That is also
that is quite the selling point. It's a very very thin book, which I like.
also, yeah. So the book itself, I don't know if those are actually available or being published in America, but it's the new Penguin Crime Classics line.
I have not seen them here, and you sent me two,
Right.
so I think
I
that can be the
did.
next book.
That can
Yeah.
be a great segue. But yeah, so that Penguin have done two drops of this line. I think 15 and 15 each time, if I'm not wrong, or it's been three with 10. I'm not sure,
I think it's
but
three with
three
10.
with 10.
Yeah.
So there's 30 out now, and what they're doing is basically um, republishing older like crime classics, and they're doing a combination between publishing like very very still famous books like Raymond Chandler or like John le Carre, and giving them this edition to then balance out sales is the idea, with out of print or more obscure crime classics that have kind of been forgotten,
Forgotten
Yeah,
classics,
and
or
make this line.
yeah, forgotten classics and influential books, or books that were popular elsewhere, not in English speaking countries, or not in the States or in the
yeah,
UK kind of area. Yeah, so there's like a lot of authors from Central Europe, um, like George Simonon has a load of these editions as well, I think, or a couple anyway.
Yeah, two or three. Yeah.
And the next one that I bought you is one that we were led to because of this line of books. So that is Edogawa Rampo, who apparently is the father of Japanese noir, and he was writing before Chandler and Hammett. So that book came out in like 1929 or something like that. And I'm not sure if that was even his first book. I am not 100% sure. But basically, Beast in the Shadows is kind of similar in a way to In a Lonely Place. We have a detective fiction writer in Japan who is kind of in love with this. He's basically simping after a woman. And the woman is married to a competitor detective fiction writer who, oh my god, gets murdered under such strange circumstances. Oh no. And the novel is written from the perspective of our simp character.
you're really selling it for me.
And it's actually really funny, but
Yeah,
it's also, there is an element of like, not necessarily magical realism, but like certainly like gothic horror, because this woman lives in a big 1920s Japanese mansion, which kind of feels, he describes it in this sort of gothic-y way. I know it's not gothic, but like that vibe.
yeah,
Because his influence is
Because his influence is Edgar Allan Poe.
nice, very
And
cool.
his name, his it's a pen name, this author, I can't remember his real name right now. His name is basically a Japanese transliteration of Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool.
So it's, yeah, his pen name is Edogawa Rampo. I'm not going to do the accent.
That's
But
fine.
yeah, and that's a really cool book, and it's only 96 pages,
Yeah,
and it's one complete story. And back in the day, they called it a novel, and here
yep,
we are on BookTube, where fantasy authors are writing 250-page books, and they call them a novella. I
yep.
don't understand this. This is lunacy. Anyway, I really enjoyed Edogawa Rampo, and it was another thing that we are talking about earlier, where we're like, oh, I want to read a bunch of these. We read In a Lonely Place for a book club, a crime book club that you were running in work when we used to work in the bookshop. Um, we read that, and then that was like kind of the early days of discovering that line of crime classics that Penguin were doing. And then it sent me kind of down a rabbit hole of looking up what they were doing because we found it really an interesting book to read, and we kind of thought, oh, maybe we could start collecting some of these. And I picked up Edogawa Rampo, and I just had a blast with that book. I now have one or two more of his. We have a couple of the green ones. I don't know if you see them
Yep.
right here. So, but we still haven't read all the other ones that we bought just because of, booktube.
There's so
stuff
many
and
things
whatever.
to read.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, it's a cool little line, and because it's classics, a lot of them are short. A lot of them are under 200 pages, and then there's the odd,
Yeah.
slightly longer one. But they publish some really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And I think both Edogawa Rampo's book and the Dorothy B. Hughes are kind of, if you're looking at them from a modern perspective, they're kind of comedies about men in these kinds of books because they're sort of funny.
Yeah, I'm like super sold on this. Especially, I wanted to double check the date. It came out in 1928, and that's
Wow.
another fascinating time in just Japanese history. So it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see something set in that time.
Yeah, I've got another one called The Gold Mask, which is, I haven't read it yet, but I assume it's going to be delightful. It's about like a cat and mouse chase between a cop and a robber, and the robber uses a different mask each time he goes out and robs or whatever. I don't know. But like his call sign is whatever mask he's wearing at the time.
Oh,
I
that's
don't know.
cool.
And then he's got another one called like The Black Lizard. I don't know. Anyway, I'll get to those. I did want to do another one this year, but didn't get around to it. But Beast in the Shadows is really fun, and I honestly think it's kind of funny.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
Um,
looking forward to that. So I will say I did start it, but I started
Oh.
it on audio because I had a copy, and it is awful on audio.
Oh,
Oh no!
It is like within like two sentences, my brain just like checked out, and then I was like, "Wait, what's going on?" And then I'd started again, and I'm like, "No, I can't do this." But then I look at it, I read the page, and I'm like, "Oh, this is good." So I don't know
Yep.
what it was about that narrator, but he was atrocious. So I will be reading this with my eyeballs.
Well, I think what I did when I bought that book is I went into the bookshop, said I want to buy one of these green books, one of these green crime pulp classics. Saw that one was 96 pages. Oh, interesting. Japanese author. Oh, interesting. Before Chandler and Hammett. Interesting. Bought it. Went to the pub. Had 2 pints. Finished the book.
Nice.
I read it in the pub by
Very
myself. So that was a fun reading experience.
How's it feel to
I
be
read
the only person that has ever read Edogawa Rampo in a pub drinking pints?
that's very possible.
That is very possible, actually.
I think I'm going to imitate you.
Well, the thing is, this book has sort of just been recently rediscovered
Yeah.
or discovered in the English-speaking world.
I think it had been. When was it first translated?
Not long ago.
Right.
Can Google it there. But I think there was also a movie made in Japan called Rampo, about the author. So he's he's obviously like a famous figure in Japan. But let's see.
What Penguin tell us? Let's see.
Taro Hirai, that was his name. Taro Hirai is the name of the author.
2006, I think, is the first time it was translated to English.
Nice. Yeah, that rings a bell, actually. That's almost, 80 years later?
Yeah.
After it was.
Yeah,
Anyway.
there's a little bit of like I don't know if it's intentional or whatever, but it kind of feels not slapstick, but it's certainly got a sort of farcical tone
Yeah,
that kind of
I'm
liked.
looking forward to seeing if this was an influence on anime like Lupin the Third, which is very
Oh yeah,
slapstick-ish detective, and
yeah.
so
There's
I'll
a
re-
load of Lupin books, isn't there? Isn't your man? Isn't he French or Belgian? Arsène
Oh,
Lupin. Arsène Lupin.
Lupin. Yeah, he's French,
French.
or he writes in French anyway.
Oh yeah. So there's a couple of Japanese films that were made from his books. You scroll up there. We are currently googling this.
We're on
that's
Wikipedia.
fair.
The Black Lizard, which came out in 1934, was made into a film by Kinji Fukasaku in 1968. That's kind of cool.
That is cool.
Anyway, Edogawa Rampo. There you go.
I'm sold.
We hope you enjoy it. What else did we buy you?
Oh,
Oh, great.
that's all you.
So, Tana French is
Here comes the essay.
one of the best contemporary Irish writers. She has a claim here, not just as a crime author, but just as a writer in general. She kind of does transcend the crime fiction bubble, and the literati also appreciate her. She is well regarded. Let's just say she's pretentious enough to get in with that crowd.
Yeah,
But I find her writing remarkably easy to read, and also she just gets Ireland very well. And that is honestly the main selling point of her writing is sense of place and character, but also distinguishing the places within Ireland. Because I would say, like, in general, if an American were to write a crime fiction book set in Ireland, you would get the stereotypical kind of look at it's a small town kind of, it's a country idiot and some detective or whatever, and you kind of get a sort of a surface level vibe of, yeah, there's an Irishness about this, but it's not really authentic.
yeah,
Um, she has a series of books set in Dublin. I am currently reading the sixth one of those that is real inner city Dublin. And she even has a kind of a difference in vibe and dialogue between the first one was sort of Dublin suburbs, and that felt like Dublin suburbs. And the one I'm reading right now feels like inner city Dublin, and it's written like that. And even the pacing that it's written in is very sort of frantic and like my brain just wants to describe it as fuck off writing, you know?
yeah,
And it absolutely is. It's like, it's very inner city Dublin, and the language in it is wonderful. But that book, The Searcher, is set out west, sort of Galway region, the west coast of Ireland, the last stop in Europe before going to America. Um, and she wrote that book as kind of an ode to westerns and that kind of rural idea of an outsider rolling into a small town and solving a problem in the small town. But the main character in that is a former Chicago detective who goes to live on the west coast of Ireland in a really small village. Some of them are Irish speaking, so they like mainly speak in Irish, and then others are, like bilingual kind of place, and then others is just the sort of regular west coast Irish town. But the tone of the book and the pace of the book and sort of the pace of her writing matches the pace of the place,
yeah,
if that makes sense.
yeah. I get what you mean.
Yeah, and she also really gets how people talk in the country versus Dublin. Like, there's a couple of characters from Dublin in that book that they just really don't get along with the country people because the country people are very chill and they think, these Dublin people are just really annoying, like just big city heads, and there's a lot of like back and forth. And usually all of this back and forth is in a pub with the characters having like liters and liters of alcohol. Anyway, um, but the main guy, whose name is escaping me, Cal Hooper, I think is his name, is retired. He's recently divorced, and he goes out to the west coast of Ireland looking for the simple life, and he just wants to fix up a gaff, a house.
Yeah.
So he buys a little fixer-upper, and he thinks he's going to have a nice old time on the west coast of Ireland, just going to the local, drinking a few pints, going home, working on my gaff. And oh boy, is he wrong. Because everybody on in the town wants to know his business. And everybody is going to start taking the piss out of the American. Oh, the Yanks coming over to the west coast, and he doesn't know how we do things over in the west coast. And it's very, very funny. But it's also very pleasant to read because she takes a lot of time describing like open spaces and grass and wind and sort of tranquility to when things start going bad. That feels like the tension is more ratcheted up, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you would maybe appreciate that book just for its kind of heavy inspiration from westerns. But she just wanted to write an Irish western.
Yes. As soon as you said
small town
Western,
as West Coast. Yeah,
I was like, okay, I'm sold.
yeah, yeah. And it's actually in the West as opposed to like American westerns being in the deep South, which is I just always find so funny.
No, they're in the West. The Southwest, but the West.
Southwest, okay, yeah, fine, fine. Well, the Southwest is like California, right? Westerns are usually in Texas,
Yeah, we're in the
or
middle.
like,
So
or like Colorado.
that's in the West. It's just a yeah. With Texas is its own thing. It's weird. Like most people here don't consider themselves Southerners. Like Texas is, especially where I'm at, is like more honestly more Midwest. Even though that would infuriate some people here, but it's
Yeah,
definitely more like more prairie land than it is like
yeah,
the West, the desert, stuff like that. That's usually generally like New Mexico, Arizona, stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I find American geography so fascinating and so confusing at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, but it's just so big. Like Texas is huge.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's certainly bigger than Ireland.
Yeah. I think the
Yeah.
metroplex I live in is bigger than Ireland.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, The Searcher is obviously it's an Irish western, uh, but it's just the west coast of Ireland, which is probably not very funny to anybody else. But if you're Irish, that just sounds very very funny.
It's
Um,
the fact that the you picture a western, you picture like dry and horses
Yeah.
and cowboys, right? And like the west of Ireland is rainier than the rest. Like it's the rainiest part of Ireland. It's the cliche of like you have all the seasons in one day.
Yeah.
yeah,
That's the west of Ireland. Like you can have a hailstorm and then you have like sunshine and then rain and then back to sunshine and then you have four rainbows in the middle and that's the west of Ireland.
and the thing I kind of love about her writing as well, and the way she writes characters, is Cal, the American guy, doesn't come in and pretend like that everybody's an idiot and he's the smartest person. He is very like, I don't want to step on people's toes
Yeah.
and blah blah blah. He doesn't talk down to anybody or patronize people in the country, you know. And also, neither does she. Like, there's a playfulness and a sort of a, we're gonna take the piss out of you, but you're allowed here if you can give it back to us,
Yeah.
and we're not stupid, you know? Life is just a little slower, but we're not stupid. And I really love that about her, about that book, because there is a tendency in media to paint small village Irish people as stupid, and I don't like it. But yeah, it's a good book. It's a really good book.
Yeah, I as soon as you said
Also
it
need to
was
read it. Yeah.
as soon as you said it was an exploration of part of Ireland, I was like, okay, yeah. When
Yep.
I'm sold. I love that. That's one of my favorite things is just reading a book that puts you in a place you haven't been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, 100%. Like, and the culture as well. Like, there's elements of Dublin culture and like countryside Ireland that are different, but the inherent kind of way people talk to each other and interact and behave in a pub is exactly the same. It's just you put one in the urban center and you know one is in a slightly slower place. But yeah, I think watching the fish out of water go through that is very fun. And she writes that well because I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Tana French is actually half American. Um, I think she might have even been born in America. But yeah, there you go.
She gets both sides of things.
She gets both sides of things. Yeah,
It
she gets both cultures very well.
it'll be cool for me to read it from the Cal side instead of the Irish side, and we'll see how my experience differs
Yeah.
from yours.
Yeah.
Also, I would say that the mystery is not all that mysterious. It's not like the greatest plot in the world, but I really like the characters and the vibe and the writing. Pretty much, that's yeah.
She was born in Vermont.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about this book?
Oh,
Oh yeah. That's
speaking of
more of
putting
the
you in a
same.
place. Yeah.
I think that's probably even more atmospheric than Tana French.
You know what? I read that book like 5 or 6 years ago, and just looking at the cover, I can smell and taste the salt air of the like cold. What ocean is it up there? What sea is it?
It's the Atlantic
Is
Ocean.
that the
yeah.
Atlantic Ocean? It's not its own little thing. Anyway,
It's
it's
probably
the
the
Atlantic Ocean.
the tip top of the Irish Sea.
That's what I was thinking, yeah, but it's not the Irish Sea, is it? Anyway,
No, don't think so.
the angry waves and the wind in your face on the Hebrides in Scotland, and I have never been there, but it is such a wonderfully atmospheric book. I do not remember anything about the plot other than like the absolute basics of
Yeah,
like what we learn, but I remember the feeling of reading it so well, and
It is the Atlantic Ocean. Yeah.
there's a melancholic nostalgia to it that is sad and beautiful and tragic. It's basically a detective from well in Scotland. He's living in Edinburgh, and he comes back to where he grew up, which is on the Hebrides, the islands. For some reason that I actually don't remember of like the general plot.
I think it's a childhood friend that dies.
Right, yeah. And he goes to
Yeah.
investigate, and also like yeah, and he reunites with all these people that he grew up with, and life is a bit rough there. It just like as it tends to be in like very small communities, especially on tiny little islands. It just feels like it's a couple of decades behind.
yeah.
Um,
Bear in mind that it's also probably 15 years since I read that book. But what I love most about Peter May is the same as Tana French. It's the sense of place, the atmospheric writing and descriptions, and the characters.
yeah,
It's more about people living through situations like this
yeah.
um, than the kind of mystery that unfolds. The mystery is just another thing that people have to go through.
It's just the excuse to kickstart things
Yeah.
and like get these people into where they are and
Yeah.
get them to like force them to interact with each other, and then yeah,
There's also like just Scottish culture, but in the same way that Tana French kind of pairs urban Dublin culture with kind of countryside culture, he does the same, but it's Scottish islands culture versus Scottish mainland culture. So you've got kind of all of these things in conversation and dialogue with each other, where the guy from the islands went off to the big city on the mainland. Big city, Edinburgh is not that large. Um, and they, you know, kind of hold it against him for running away, but he needed to run away. And then he comes back and he starts to unearth all of these just buried, I don't know, traumas and things that happened in his past. Buried relationships with like friends and with family or extended family, and also the relationship with the church. So the sort of influence of Calvinism in rural Scotland, uh, which is a little more extreme even than some forms of Catholicism.
Yeah.
And there's a good bit about, the church doing bad things, and how that relates directly to who people on the island grew up to be. Yeah, so that's kind of what that book is about. Also, a lot about like repressed memories, and maybe the main character also has repressed memories as well as his friends on the island. But anyway, that's all I'll say about that. And he wrote that as a trilogy, and it was he'd been writing for a really long time and selling well, but selling mostly actually in France. He was published a lot in French, so he would write in English and get published in French. And he wrote those books then, and they hit, like they just took off, and they were massive bestsellers in the UK and Ireland. And then all of his books got, sort of repackaged, republished with the style, they're the covers of those books. And now all of his books are published in that kind of style. So they all looks like one series, but it's not.
Oh, okay.
I'd also say like it's a trilogy, but I only read the first one and it's satisfying by itself.
You can read it as a standalone. Yeah. And he again is also a little more on the contemporary fiction side of crime writing, although he does write a decent old crime thriller yarn. And yeah, so he finished that series probably 10, 12 years ago. It was 3 books. And he just came back this year to write another book in that series, just catching up with everybody 15 years later.
Oh, cool.
And he kind of, the characters are a little older, a little more jaded. They've lived through a lot more shit. And basically, where are we now and what's going on? And it was really good. It was really, really good. More of the same.
I think that was the one that probably needed the most selling, because I read the back of it and I was like, okay, but yeah, it sounds good. I'm very interested in that.
There's also, you're going to learn a lot about Scottish culture and history. And like the black houses are a specific thing, a specific bit of Scottish architecture, like island architecture. The third one has a lot about these. The third one is called the Chessmen, and it's about these little chess figures that were discovered on the islands in the 1800s, and they're like 1,000 years old.
Oh wow!
And they're in some museum in the island or on the islands. And there's a mystery directly tied to those little chess pieces and a plane crash that happened on the island in the 80s. And he kind of weaves all of that into the characters, basically. That's the third book, though. But yeah, that's Peter May. Peter May is probably one of my go-tos, probably one of my favorite writers, just because I like vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he writes vibes.
He does. Very vibey.
It's very vibey. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So this next one, you don't have to sell me on the writer, because I'm already sold. I will be reading everything he's ever written. You just have to sell me on reading this specific one.
Well, that's your job.
I wasn't sure if we ended up sending you that one or not. So far we've sent you a bunch of like things that you can specifically get here or are very popular here. This one, not the case. You could just as easily get that anywhere in the US. So since you liked The Power of the Dog, um, this is the first book in his last trilogy that I just finished this year. Um, and it's kind of a greatest hits tour of everything that he likes to do in his books. Basically, like everything that he's written, I have read everything that he's ever written, and all of the best bits are in these three books.
Okay, so for our audio enjoyers that definitely aren't looking at the screen, it's Don Winslow's
yes.
City on Fire. I forgot to say that.
Yes, so it's a loose kind of retelling. I almost don't want to call it a retelling as much as it's just inspired by the Trojan War, and I don't know how to pronounce the Aeneid. Is that how you say it? Aeneid. So we have it's essentially the two sides.
You mean the Iliad? The Aeneid is a Roman story, right? Or is it?
It's not the one. It's not Homer. It's Virgil.
Oh, okay. Then yeah, the
Aeneid.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyways, the Trojan War anyway, and Helen of Troy, and the two sides in this case are the Italian mob and the Irish mob in Providence, Rhode Island. And the main character is Danny Ryan. He's Irish or Irish American, and something I really appreciated reading this, that I reread the first book this year, and I read it when it came out a few years ago, and something that I really appreciated this time, having lived in Ireland longer myself, is the details of research that he must have done to get the ways of speaking of Irish Americans specifically, that you wouldn't necessarily notice if it wasn't there. But knowing what to look for, it's just a nice little detail that just really make it come alive.
Feels like Ireland in 1950.
Yeah. But basically, how I would pitch this is, it's Don Winslow doing everything that he does best. The mob is involved, breakneck pace, great characterization. You get some drugs thrown in there. And it's completely distilled to there's absolutely no fat on this book.
Nice.
You read it so quickly. There's a ton of dialogue and just really snappy sentences. No bullshit, straight to the point.
Very little description as well. Like there are not many paragraphs in this book.
It's such an efficient book. He tells you everything you need to know about the places, the characters, and the situations in as few words as you possibly could, and yet you know what you're picturing. You know who these people are. You can just tell this is a very, very experienced author who knows what he's doing. He doesn't need to waste any time. He knows exactly what to say, so you know enough to understand what's going on and who these people are. And I found all three of these so addictive. I think I read each of them in like a day or two, because they're just so quick and the chapters are so short that you're like, oh, one more chapter. Oh, it's 2 pages. Oh, another one. And you just keep going. And so it is definitely a trilogy, but each book has its thematic, like its like location and like its main, I guess, like not recurring cast, but like secondary characters that it's dealing with. So I would say in terms of commitment, you don't have to like necessarily read them all in one go, but you can, and it wouldn't take you very long.
I probably will.
So it's great. I think I usually, when people ask me where to start with Don Winslow, I generally say The Power of the Dog because it's his best book. But if people don't want to start with such a long book, I'd say The Winter of Frankie Machine. I will be adding these to my initial suggestions
Okay.
if people are open to trilogies, because I just think it's extremely easy to get into, um, and you just get a great idea of what it is that he likes to do. Like, I feel like if somebody were to read these and they're like, I hated it, I'm like, okay, don't bother reading anything else that he wrote then, because this is just what it's about.
It's just top tier thriller writing.
Yeah.
Like, it's top shelf thriller writing distilled. Um, and we were talking about it because I read that, and it's sort of his swan song of his writing career.
Yeah.
And Dennis Lehane is kind of winding down as a novelist as well, and he wrote Small Mercies, and he did exactly the same thing. It is so economical
Yeah.
with its word count, but it's ridiculously efficient. It's honestly really impressive
Yeah.
how they do so much with so little.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can, I think, if you compare it to something like The Power of the Dog, it's a lot less deep. But it's, I think you can make it as deep as you want to. You can just read it as a fun filler and then forget about most of it within a couple of weeks. Or something might connect with you, or you can, try to like pull on a thread and but I don't think he's attempting to do anything particularly groundbreaking in terms of his writing career. He's just having a great time. You can tell he's having a great
Yeah.
time writing it. And he's just like, oh, I love writing about this thing. Let's just throw it in there. It's great. It's great.
Yeah, that's
Yep.
that's good enough for me. If the writer is having fun and doing what they want, I mean, it's just so much better than someone phoning it in or just thinking they have to write to a certain audience. The fact that he's just like going for it. I cracked it open when you mentioned the writing, and yeah, this is very terse almost in the way it's formatted, let alone the way it's written. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I really like that writing style. The more I have read, especially this year, that's been like my favorite thing, is like a hyper competent writer who knows exactly what they want to put on the page, and they're very efficient.
And it works for a thriller so well because it makes you almost breathless reading it, because you're turning the pages so fast and going from one sentence to the next, and they're short sentences. And then he knows how to slow you down. If we're like, okay, now we're going into a calmer situation, and suddenly there's paragraphs showing up and descriptions, and like he's really playing with your like heart rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sold.
He's
That's
good
my
at
next.
manipulating that.
That's my next Winslow book. So
Nice. On that note, I actually need to hop off. Do we have more books?
one more,
Did we send you more books?
but it's a
I
Carlos
can
book.
finish.
That'll be your job.
Cool.
Great. Thank you for
yeah.
having us. We're not going anywhere. Just me.
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you.
She has another call.
Oh.
I don't remember what. Oh, I do remember what I got you. Yeah.
What is it?
It's a Star Call Henry.
Oh, nice.
So, this is a book that when I actually bought it for you, I had not read it yet, and now I've read it.
Oh.
But it is Roddy Doyle, who's one of my favorite writers. I just hadn't read this one, and I will say why. Because it is historical fiction about the Irish War of Independence. And in school in this country, that is all you learn about. It's not all you learn about, but paired with everything else we learn about history, that is the one constant that you learn from when you are 4 to when you are 16, 17.
That's like Texas history. The only thing they teach me is the Alamo, and it's like that was literally a week.
Yeah. But so I hadn't read this one, but I wanted to. Obviously, I've owned it for a long time, and I've always thought, oh yeah, I'll get to Star Call Henry. It's gonna be good. Whenever I'm feeling particularly nationalist, I'll read it. But Jimmy from the Fantasy Network was over with his wife in September, and we took them to the bookshop, and I also wanted to get them things that were particularly Irish. And I'm surprisingly not very well read in contemporary Irish fiction, apart from a couple that I like. And they didn't actually have a couple of the books that I wanted to get them from Roddy Doyle, namely like The Commitments or Paddy Clark, Ha Ha Ha, which he won the Booker Prize for, which is about basically a 10-year-old boy growing up in inner city Dublin. And I was like, buy this book, it's me. Um, but A Star Called Henry was there, and I was like, okay, here you go, Jimmy. You can learn a little bit about Irish history. You hit all the cliff notes, basically, of the War of Independence. But it's Roddy Doyle, and he writes in Dublin slang. His prose is basically North Dublin slang, which is very sort of kind of working class speak. Um, I soften the way I talk a lot here on BookTube, and if I talk to people who are not from Dublin, but my accent is actually quite strong. My accent right now is quite soft. I don't know if it sounds soft, but my accent is quite soft now compared to what it used to be. But if I'm with all my friends, it really comes out. Um, and Roddy Doyle kind of writes like that, and he writes using all that language. So his language is very rich, and he's also a little bit like Tana French, sort of crossed into the. He has been able to crack the pretentious literary crowd, because they call it so colorful. The language is colorful and authentic. Um, but I recently, after I made Jimmy buy that book, I did read it because I felt bad. I was like, okay, well, now I should probably read it.
Yeah.
And I read it, and it's great. It's so good. It might actually be my favorite Roddy Doyle book now.
Oh, wow.
I'm not sure. I'll have to. I think The Snapper is really good. I don't know if you've ever heard of The Commitments. They also made a movie about it.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's about a like a group of young lads in 1980s Dublin, late 80s, where nobody could get a job. They decided to set up a soul band when everybody's listening to punk music or synth or all the stuff that was popular in the 80s. They
Yeah.
decided to set up this 1930s style soul band called The Commitments, and it's just about those young people living in absolute poverty, but they didn't know any better. And A Star Called Henry is a little bit of the same vibe. It's Dublin in the early 1900s.
Yeah,
So
you picked the right one for me because that era of
yeah,
history is like my more than mild obsession. So
cool.
yeah, it's like it's perfect for me. So I'm really
Yeah,
looking forward to this one.
but yeah, it's like main character is Henry Smart. He is kind of a cheeky scallywag character. He's also very smart, a very on the nose name. He's kind of like a boy genius, but um, he sort of Forrest Gumps his way through the main events of Irish history leading up to the Civil War. And he meets kind of all the key players, all of the key historical figures. So the names probably won't mean anything to you when you read, when he meets certain people, but just know that these guys are like the main revolutionaries of
Okay.
that period. So yeah, he goes to work for Michael Collins' gang, and Michael Collins is kind of the main revolutionary hero that got Ireland its independence. But it's just there's a snappiness to the writing, but it's artful without being pretentious. He writes character very well, and he just tells a cracking story. Like the story is good.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Sounds good to me. Like I said, perfect setting. Just cracking it open. It looks good. I like to do that. Like, I have not spoiled myself yet doing that, but I like to just crack open to a random page and just skim it and kind of see the just the style of the writer.
Yes. He does a lot. He does which is quite a continental European thing. Dialogue is written with
I was
a
about to say
dash.
something about that
Yeah.
because yeah, I cracked it open and I'm like, there's no quotation marks in this, but I like this layout. I've actually never read anything formatted like that, so that'll be interesting.
It's a little more common here and in mainly in continental Europe. Like I noticed that so obviously I read in Spanish as well. All Spanish books have dialogue written in that format.
Yeah, I might like that better. Just looking at it, I it makes it a lot
I like
easier
that
to
better.
understand when
One
someone's talking.
100%. 100%. I love it. I think it's great. I think all books should have that.
Which one do you think I should read first?
Out of all of those,
Yeah.
ooh, I think you might jive with In a Lonely Place. I think it's an interesting book. You're gonna dive deep into like, oh, when did Dorothy B. Hughes write this? What was the deal with this? What was the deal with the movie? There's so much context around the book as well that will probably be your cup of tea. Um, and then also, I think the Edogawa Rampo is just very interesting.
Yeah.
The time period, the fact that it's sort of newly discovered in the Western world, I think you'll probably sink your teeth more into those. If you want a flavor of Ireland, sure, read Tana French or Roddy Doyle first. But I think you're kind of like, ooh, diving deep into this topic or this thing that's very interesting. I'd say one of the two green crime classics first.
All right. That sounds good to me. Yeah, I they're sitting on my desk instead of like my well, I don't have shelf space for them, let's be real. But
Yeah, neither do we. We don't have fucking shelf space.
yeah, I'm glad to see that your bookshelves are as jam-packed as mine are. Let me see if you can see right now. I actually had to add space. Look at that. That's sitting above my couch, just
Oh,
floating there
nice.
cuz and it's jam-packed. That's just war that's just nonfiction about war and war memoirs.
I do remember that being your thing as well.
Yeah, so I don't have any space. So these are going to sit on on the desk more than likely because they look nice too, and I will slowly chip away at
Cool.
them. I want to read them all in 2025. Like the rest of the year is like survive the Cosmere and read two and finish my last two Glenn Cook novels, and then
Yeah, the rest of the year for me is I'm obviously reading a ton of French at the moment, which is sort of my comfort read. It's comfort in the sense that I don't want to pick anything new. I know I like this. I'm going to read this and I'm going to enjoy it. And then my cozy Christmas read is To Green Angel Tower. And I am like 150 pages into the hardcover. And I have like 7,000
yeah,
pages
I was
left.
gonna say that book is so big. I used to own a
It's
copy of
so,
the trade paperback that was just one brick of
yeah,
paper. It was just a lot.
yeah. I am loving it so far though because I'm in the mood for it. I took a little break from fantasy the last few months, and I love reading that kind of fantasy at Christmas. So I was working up for it. So yeah, I'm really loving it so far. I also have like I had previously owned here. They printed them in two paperbacks, which it like because the book was split.
Yeah.
Um, and both paperbacks are 800 pages. Um, and it's not like the font is huge. It's just like a little bit bigger than what it is in the hardcover because the hardcover has like fucking minuscule font. There's like 50 lines a page in the hardcover.
That would kill me.
And the paperbacks are like regular normal paperbacks, and they're both 800 pages. So I was looking actually where I am in the paperback versus where I am in the hardcover, and I think I'm like 130, 140 pages into the hardcover. That's 300 and something pages into the paperback.
Wow.
So yeah, I'll probably be reading that till early January, but that'll be my Christmas period read, and I'll finish off my ton of French, and then I will read this.
Good.
And whenever I reread Mystic River, because I probably will, it's been many years since I've read it. I'll read it in that edition
Oh, good. Good. It needs to be read.
because I don't annotate shit in my book. I'm fine reading in a cool first edition.
Yeah, same.
That's
Like the books are meant to be read.
yeah, 100%.
Well, this has been a ton of fun. I am very excited
Yeah,
about all
man.
of these.
Our little swappy was fun to do. It was also fun to run around the bookshop because we were both working and we were just running around going, maybe we could get that for Joe. Oh, maybe we could get that. And then just the whole process of putting the package together because I sent it to you with the official bookshop shit.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun.
Yeah, the hunting for those books was fun because I owned. You actually now have nicer copies of those Travis McGee books than I do. Well, aside from the hardcover that I have of the first three books, that
Hmm.
thing is incredibly rare. But no, I was looking at my copies and I'm like, well, I guess I could always just send him mine if I couldn't find the ones I needed. But I happened to, in one go, we found all five of those at my favorite bookshop. I thought they might be there
Yeah.
for some reason. I've been lucky and I found a lot of John D. McDonald paperbacks just in my area. But yeah, the fact that I managed to find the first edition or the first time they've ever been printed for all five of them, and they all have
Yeah,
that same
big was cool.
style. It's just great.
I found something cool the other day. Give me a second. I don't know where I put it. So I'll show you the kind of cooler thing after. But I found this edition
Hey,
of City.
whoa! Super cool.
Um, we have another little secondhand bookshop. Not the one I was telling you about earlier. There's another one. It's called the Secret Bookshop, and it's not really advertised. It's called the Secret Book and Record Store, and you have to like walk down this alleyway to get into it. And they always have a little pile of recently like received, pulpy paperbacks basically. And I found this edition of City
Very
by
cool.
Clifford D. Smack, which is a book I really want to read
It's
because
so good. Yep,
dogs.
because dogs, like it's so good.
And then right beside it, I found a few Robert Silverbergs. And right here is a first edition of the mass market paperback of Downward to the Earth in pretty cool condition.
Yeah.
And um, where is it? First printing, January 1971. I don't know if that is the first edition, but first printing of this,
There's a
whatever,
good
I don't
chance
know.
it is, being the early 70s and it being science fiction.
The coolest thing about it is in the middle of it, you can really tell it's pulp era. There is, if you go to the middle of the book, there's an ad for a sci fi magazine, like a little pull out
Yeah.
ad for the Science Fiction Book Club Hall of Fame magazine. And it's um, take any three science fiction books, blah, 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 if you wish, for $1.
Yeah. Man, I wish. Speaking of science fiction book club, they just went out of business. Yep.
No.
Just like I think they're done as of like this month or something. Sad.
Shit. Well, I own a piece of history now. This was €4.
Not bad.
And that was a fiver. Anyway, I thought you might appreciate
Oh, I
that.
do. Yeah.
There were also a ton of like Robert Jordan Wheel of Time mass markets, but
Those will rip
I
in
have
half
very
reading
little
them.
interest. Yeah. I'm reading too many big fantasies at the moment. I can't do Wheel of Time. Anyway, that's it.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on here and for swapping books with me. That was
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
I want to thank you for inviting us to the longest book haul ever on YouTube.
It might very well be. Maybe let's add we have to add a caveat. The longest book haul from someone not trying to sell you books, because most of those giant book
Yes.
hauls are just an advertisement for their store, which I don't even want to get started
This
on that.
But yeah, no, it was really fun to do, and it was really fun to like buy a little selection box of random crap. Not that they're crap, but random crap. Anyway, and yeah, cheers for having us on. Sorry that y'all all had to bounce.
Oh, that's okay.
But yeah, thanks, man.
Yep. I will see you next time.